Painting miniatures in night scenes, lit exclusively by the moonlight, is a challenge every painter wants to undertake at some time. Myself, I tried that several times in the past, with not the best results, actually. I also try to look around for tutorials and examples of other miniatures painted in night scenes, but I have always found them to be either too blue or too grey. So I try to embark in this journey on my own, and this video shows you my latest results. For a proper rendition of miniatures set in a night scene, we have to understand a few things about light. When we paint miniatures which are supposed to be set under the moon, we have to take the Purkinje effect into account. This effect makes us see things which shift towards the red spectrum as darker than they actually are, and the redder they are, the darker they are. And also we have to take into account the fact that the general intensity of light will be lower, and so colors will tend to be more grey. With all this in mind, we can now switch to the practical part. For this video, I decided to use a Newborn Strigoi miniature from the Carnevale miniature game by TTcombat. If you don't know Carnevale, I highly recommend you to try it. It's amazing, and it's set in the magnificent setting of the Italian city of Venice, with unique rules for interacting with the water, of course, and also for parkouring around, jumping on the roofs. It's really a great game. I recommend that. Also, since I am a TT agent, TTcombat provided me with a starter set of TT paints, which I am using along with other colors in this video. You can find all the links in the description of the video. For the painting of this iconic miniature from the range, I decided to start after properly washing it to remove the mold release agent with a black primer from Vallejo using my airbrush. Why is that? No particular reason. I was just in the mood for using the airbrush. You can of course use any black primer paint that you want in a spray can, or also using a brush. After the black primer was dried, I retouched the recesses in the base using the same primer with a simple brush. Now it was time for the double primer. For this I used the white ink from Scale Color Artist from scale 75, and the white was sprayed on the miniature following not exactly a zenithal pattern, because I decided that my newborn vampire was staying under the moonlight, but with the moon behind his back, slightly behind his back on his left, so that his face would be in the half in the darkness, and this would create more interesting shadows to work on. So I sprayed the white ink carefully, avoiding to spray too much white ink on it, because I wanted to preserve as much as possible the shadows in the initial process. This is not exactly the process of the so-called double primer, where we basically spray white on all our miniature, leaving black just in the recesses. I wanted to have more pronounced shadows on my model. It was now time to prepare the color palette. This is my wet palette, where I prepared 3 grays from Vallejo model color. They are in order Vallejo silver gray, which is a silver gray of course, with a small warm tint, which I'm using for the most extreme highlights in lieu of white. On its right we have Vallejo medium sea gray, a great grey color with a tint of blue in it, which will be very useful for our middle tones and some highlights. And the darkest grey is Vallejo model color dark sea green, a greenish dark grey, which I'm using for the shadows. This doesn't mean that I am going to paint my miniature in black and white, but rather than what I am now going to do is a sort of sketching for all the lights and the shadows. I want to enhance them both, because okay, this step is extremely relaxing and pleasant, to be fair, but the more I work here, the more precise I am at this step, the easier will be for all the next steps, where I am going to put colors on my miniatures. Of course, they're going to be dulled, they're going to be bluish colors, but still colors nonetheless. Once the sketching is done, it is time to prepare the colors. And for my Newborn Strigoi, I am not going to use an extremely complex palette. Instead, it's going to be rather sort of a Zorn palette. The first color is an off-white, which here takes the form of an extremely vintage Ushabti Bone, a bottle that has been laying around for more time than I like to admit. The second one is a brilliant red from TTcombat set, Viscera red, a nice primary red. And the third one is a brown, sort of a burnt umber, which is TTcombat Trench Mud. I prepared these three colors as normal, diluting them with water on my wet palette. And before using them on my mini, I want to add a very specific touch for this technique to my palette, which is a nice primary blue taken from Scale 75 Scale Color Artist Basic Colors set. I then use my grays to dull down all my colors, and I also add a bit of primary blue to my red in order to simulate the Purkini effect. Remember, we were talking about that before. So, with my palette ready, I start applying the colors to my Newborn Strigoi. The lighter gray will be used instead of the white for the highlights, and the darker gray will help my colors with the shadows. There is not much to say actually about this step. Here I am just applying the colors where I want them to be, keeping them quite thin, because I want the previous work with shadows and lights to appear through the colors to show. I am using the off-white for the shirt and the socks, the brown for the pants and the shoes, and for the hair as well, although here the strong highlights will make it almost white, because I really want to stress where the light is coming from. Now, under my strong painting light, everything seems brighter than it is, but in any case you can see that in the end the model tends to be quite colorless, quite dull, and this is the effect I am going for. The sash is in theory of a bright red, but since I am dulling it down, it appears almost violet. To be precise, it should be darker here, but I'm still experimenting, so I'm fine with that. You will notice that I do not divide rigidly my work into something like base color, shadows and highlights, or base color, highlights and shadows, but I tend to work in a sort of a circular, more chaotic way. Like sometimes, often to be fair, I directly paint with the darker color directly over the primer or the brighter one and so on. I think that painting cannot be easily split into a codified process, but it's rather something emotional, irrational, inspirational. So feel free to paint however you want. This is probably the most important advice I am going to give you today. Oh, a small point of silver is used for the minuscule pieces of metal on the Mini, and the base is finalized with the brown for the hat on the base, the iconic hat on the base, and our usual grays for the pavement. You will notice that up to this point I haven't talked about the skin, and that's because for the skin of our vampire I am going to use something really special, the so-called glue technique developed by Alessandro Bonavero, Dark Ages Workshop, one of my favorite painters, I think. For this technique the base colors need to be perfectly dry, so a bit of a blow dryer is recommended. But after that I just grab the super glue. I have one with a small brush that you can see in the video, and I pass with the super glue all the surfaces of skin of my vampire. For this you need to be in an extremely dry environment. Do not do this if the humidity level of your room is too high. I don't recommend doing that if outside is raining, but anyway, you will judge by yourself. And once the first layer of glue is placed accurately over all of the area of the skin, and maybe even a bit of the rest of the area around to protect it from the further work, you can use your blow dryer to dry it as best as you can, and then proceed with a second layer of super glue, just to be sure. Why is that? Well, we will see in a moment. Anyway, even after blow drying, I recommend waiting for 24 hours before proceeding, because now we are going to use washes over our glue, and super glue reacts really bad with water, creating ugly white crusts. So better be safe than sorry and wait for a day before proceeding. This doesn't mean that meanwhile we can do other things, and so I pick a black wash, anyone will do, and I start stressing the shadows of my model. I think that projected shadows are something that is often underrated when painting models. Here I really want to stress this aspect of the visuals, so I also paint a projected shadow of my miniature onto the base and onto the model itself when needed, for example below the arm and in the darkest part of the model. If you are unsure where to place the shadows, just put your model beneath a light and look where the shadows are projected. There you will have to paint. You can also take a picture of your miniature under a light where the shadows are strong and use it for reference while you are painting. This is what I did for a further step of my painting. While I was waiting, I also took a very dark black, which is Green Stuff World Max Dark Black, and started painting the rim of the base. Of course I'm going to do this again later, but since I had to wait, I said why not. And since I was on the base, I started using one of my favorite mediums, meaning oil paints. So I took a bit of black and diluted it with white spirit and using it to fill in the crevices of the base. This is because I wanted extremely strong shadows in the base, and I find that oil paints have both an extremely pleasant consistency to work with and are also very heavy and pigmented. This helps when we are painting strong, dark, deep shadows. I just put the oil in the crevices, trying to avoid the cobblestones above, and then I passed a cotton swab dipped in mineral spirits in order to remove it from the stones. Just keep in mind that since it's so heavily pigmented, the black will likely leave some color behind. This is not a huge problem, we can solve that later, but you can also help yourself with a brush again dipped in white spirit. This will take some time to dry as well, but the following day we can return to our mini and return to the skin. For this I took a black wash and mixed it with a green-blue wash, namely Coilia Green shade from Citadel Color. I really like this wash. What I'm aiming for here is a sort of a greenish, bluish, but more greenish black tint. And I'm going to use that to create some veining and mottling on the skin of my newborn vampire. The effect is quite easy to get, because all we have to do is to paint the skin of the model with this wash and let it dry. Try to avoid pooling, but it's not the end of the world, we're going to set that up later. Anyway, what we are aiming for is for a nice coverage, which is uniform and is also relatively heavy among the whole surface of the skin. Then we are going to use the nice layer of super glue, which is very resistant to solvents, below our washes, and we are going to use a very strong solvent, which is isopropyl alcohol. You have to be very careful with using this solvent because it will dissolve the paint up to the bare resin of the miniature. In this case it will dissolve primer as well if you're not careful, but as long as you keep it on the super glue layer you will be fine. With this I am taking an old brush and I am stippling it on the surface of my mini. The isopropyl alcohol will dissolve the wash, but it will also make the pigments pool, creating a nice pattern of veins and mottling. You can repeat these steps as much as you want. You can place the wash, let it dry, put the alcohol on it, and then apply some more wash and some more alcohol. Just try as much as you please. It's not very risky, as long as the alcohol does not get on the parts of the mini which are not covered by the super glue. At this point our miniature was basically done, but I wasn't completely satisfied with the overall effect. I think that my Strigoi needed some starker and darker shadows. Under dim lighting, shadows become basically black, and painting shadows with black is technically wrong, but under these conditions I thought that would be okay. In order to create my dark shadows, I prepared some more black oil paint. Why oils? Well, that's because I just love painting with oils, even if they take days, if not weeks, to dry completely. I wanted to be very careful with placing these dark shadows. So I took my miniature, put it under a lamp, and took a photo of it. And using this as a guide, I started applying the black using a round tip brush. Then I used a flat brush to soften the edges of these applications, softening them when needed, but also keeping those stark, dark shadows. Another interesting application of the oil paints is to use them for the basing, especially with bases like this one, which is just stone, and can result in something very chalky if you're using the dry brush, or could be annoying when working with layers. With oils, instead, blending becomes trivial. So for my base, I prepared a grayscale and added in some phthalo blue to give that bluish moonlight effect. Again, round tip brush for placing, flat brush for blending. With the base finalized, I was now ready for the final touches. So I grabbed my extreme black and used this for the lip of the base, as well as to reinforce some of the extreme shadows on my mini. I used a combination of this and of the regular black from the TTcombat set to help me with darkening the shadows where I thought was needed. I don't think that varnishing miniatures is always needed, but in this case I first airbrushed some varnish matte on the whole miniature, focusing on the skin of my miniature, because there was still some gloss from the super glue that I used for the effect that was frankly excessive. So once my miniature was completely matte, I then took some satin varnish, which I bought years ago at a craft store in the US, whatever that works, and I sprayed the miniature again to remove some of the extreme matte effect and focusing on the skin areas, because the previous gloss was excessive, but now some varnish was helpful to render some of the surface texture variation of the different parts of the miniature. However, no vampire would be complete without any blood. Now, I didn't want to draw my miniature in blood, but I wanted enough of it on my miniature to tell a story. My newborn Strigoi had just become a vampire, and he had almost unconsciously killed his first victim in his process to vampirehood. So I took the trusted alcohol-based paints from Tamiya, X27 Clear Red. If I could build an altar to a single color, that would be it, and also clear blue and smoke. These clear colors are great for various blood and in general translucent effects, or also for stained glass and stuff like that, of course. But for blood they are amazing. Of course, X27 is the star of the show, but here I wanted to experiment a bit and tried to mix it with smoke and also with X23 Clear Blue. My experiments, however, confirmed what I had in mind, which is that clear blue works just better to give the effect of dark blood. Maybe I should have gone for an even darker blood, but here I wanted to not be extremely realistic with the blood, but rather to have it draw the eye of the observer, because our psychology is that when we see blood we pay special attention to it, and I just wanted to shrug and say, okay, you know what, maybe this should be almost black, but whatever, look at it, it's blood. So, well, not much to say here. After mixing the two, again with the help of isopropyl alcohol, I took some of this dark and red, almost purple, blood and placed it on strategic points of my mini. I tried also to render some blood dripping on the leg of the vampire himself, in order again to try and tell a story. And finally, here's my newborn Strigoi in all its lightbox glory. A model which is incredibly hard to get right on camera, and of which I'm quite proud, because even if it's not perfect and I still have a lot to learn about this kind of painting, I am quite happy with the result and of where the journey has taken me so far. Anyway, thank you for watching, I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Happy painting, bye!